All right, now what's good? This is Fulan speaks again. Back dealing with some sports, and this, of course, caught my attention on First Take today. Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman were debating what they thought about the 76ers chances this year. This was after a game that where they played the Golden State Warriors Saturday night. So let's see what they're talking about, and let's see.
What is going to be the Sixers' Achilles heel come playoff time?
It's going to be Coach Brett Brown. It's on him. It's on his watch. And let me say this before I get into this. I think that he's taking unnecessary heat for Saturday night's loss to the Golden State Warriors. I was at that game. He doesn't deserve it. First of all, Joel Embiid was out. That's number one. Number two, it's not his fault that Mike Scott decided to inexplicably foul Kevin Durant with 35 seconds left and you're only down 3. That was an unnecessary foul. You didn't have to do that. It's not his fault that Ben Simmons missed the rim entirely, which is a violation when he was at the free throw line, because you're supposed to know.
That right there was on Brett Brown. They should not have went for that trying to miss that free throw like that, because the Sixers at the time were down 3. So if you make that and then foul, or they would have been down. They would either be down 2 or 1. But had they made Ben Simmons had made it, and it's probably a good chance that if he even tried to make it, they would have had the result they wanted anyway with a chance to rebound it. But had he made it, all they would have had to do was foul, because there was over 12 seconds left. And then in the fourth quarter of a basketball game, that's a lot. That's plenty of time.
Hit the rim, okay? And it's not his fault that Tobias Harris caught an inbounds pass and he stepped his foot out of bounds when he caught the inbounds pass. That's not Coach Brown's fault. So I'm not putting that on him. I know they got outscored.
Personally, I do put a lot on that game against the Warriors on Brett Brown. However, I mean, I don't kill him for the game, because after all, it is the Golden State Warriors, and really any game where you play against Golden State, you can lose. And I felt the Sixers, for the most part, played very well. And they showed that they can hang with the Golden State Warriors. But they have some great players there, man. KD was very good, almost unstoppable, and then Steph Curry was also very clutch in the end. So.
By 15 points in the third quarter. They won every other quarter, but got blitzed 38-23 in the third quarter, and that was pretty much it. That was the decisive outcome. But here's what it comes down to. I'm holding on to what I witnessed last season, Max Kellerman, and that is this. I stated this, and I'm not an advocate of Brett Brown, this bad coach. I think he's a good coach. I'm not an advocate of him getting fired or anything like that. I think he deserved a contract extension after all the things that he had to put up with. But I stand by what I said last year during the playoffs. I never saw a coach lose 3 games in a playoff series. I saw Brett Brown lose 3 games, and I'm holding on to that for dear life. Game 1 against Boston in the semifinals of the Eastern Conference. They weren't ready. He admitted that publicly. Game 2, Boston goes on some kind of run, overcoming a 20-point deficit. Brett Brown doesn't call a timeout. He doesn't make a substitution. He makes no adjustments whatsoever. That lost that game. Game 3, Redick inbounding a pass and playing the role of point guard as opposed to being prepared to shoot the rock against the Boston Celtics. And Brett Brown wants to make the argument at the time that everybody, that play had been working for us, 50 times during the regular season. Well, the problem isn't that Brett Brown knew it. It's that Brad Stevens knew it and told his team to be prepared for that play. So again.
Well, I actually agree with a lot of what Stephen A. Smith has said here with regards to Brett Brown. I remember that series last year like it was yesterday. And I really was, at that moment, my initial emotional response to the game was I did want Brett Brown fired, because I felt as though he coached that series poorly. I felt he was outcoached by Brad Stevens at every turn. There were situations where, and I'll add this to what Stephen A. Smith was saying. There were many instances where Brett Brown was unwilling to put in the type of personnel that I felt would match up with the Boston Celtics physically, because honestly, with the team the Sixers had last year, especially coming off the bench, first off, you have in your starting lineup, you had Dario Saric, you had Robert Covington, and we had J.J. Redick, which made you a pretty formidable three-point shooting team. Even with Joel Embiid having the ability to step out there and make some at a rate where you at least have to respect him. And then coming off the bench, we had Ersan Ilyasova and Marco Bellinelli, who are 2 3-point shooters as well. So many times the Sixers can run out there a squad, even with Embiid sitting during those last 15 or 16 games of the year. You can have a team with Ben Simmons surrounded by shooters and control the pace, play a little bit of defense, and really put some semblance of a strong team out there. But Brett Brown, I believe, actually fell in love with that style, and he wrongly believed that it would be effective against the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics last year was the number one team in defense, especially in defending the three-point shot. Where I felt Brett Brown failed at was in recognizing that the style of play that he wanted to employ would be ineffective against the Celtics. He should have known that prior to the start of that series. However, I'll give him that. He wanted to try it out game one, and as Stephen A. mentioned, they were unprepared. So Brett Brown went out there, and he went out there with his normal strategy. He wanted to employ the offense, which is about space and pace. And I think they underestimated the Boston Celtics' athleticism and their ability to stick the three-point shot. With a guy like Brad Stevens, he came in with the perfect plan. His plan was, okay, let's take away the three-point shots. Okay, we will sell out. We'll go up under the screens, everything. Guard your man. And really, in the first game, they let Joel Embiid score, kind of have what he wanted. And Ben Simmons, pretty much, they lagged off of him and crowded the lane to take away his ability to get to the lane whenever he wanted, or they made it extremely difficult. And this knocked Ben off of his game because on one hand, Ben Simmons wants to be a passer. And the genius of Brad Stevens and what made him better than a guy like Brett Brown is that Brad Stevens, his system is quite malleable, whereas Brett Brown's system seems to be quite static. In that, Brad Stevens looked at the 76ers and he looked at what the Sixers like to do, and it decided to formulate a strategy where he took away the thing that the Sixers wanted to do. He made sure he took that away, and he forced you to play a different way, which Ben Simmons, being a young first-year player, he wasn't prepared for. And along with that, there were players we had on the roster like Rashawn Holmes. We also had guys like Justin Anderson and other players who were more athletic. Like, I remember even and it would be a better matchup against Boston because sometimes you have to scratch the system wanting to shoot threes. You have to be able to win a game in a different way other than the way you want. And I think Brett Brown's problem is he wants to win this particular way. He believes a particular style and a particular approach to the game is the key to succeeding without factoring in the actual personnel that he has or the team that he's playing and whether or not that style will be successful. Successful coaches are able to look at their personnel and look at the personnel of the opposition and put together a plan that enables the personnel he has to maximize their chances to win against the particular personnel they're playing. They don't go out there and just force a particular system, and this is what Brett Brown did at times.
And those are the kind of things that count against you. And everybody, and I'm telling you, higher-ups in the Philadelphia 76ers know this. That wasn't Brett Brown's greatest moment, his greatest series. They know the talent that they have assembled for him with the addition of Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, okay? They know that they need to keep their eyes on Brett Brown because they know Brett Brown has something to prove. And last point, Max,
I agree with Stephen A. Smith on that point. The Sixers owner, Josh Harris, who's the majority owner, he really made it clear earlier in the week that with the additions that he gave the 76ers, Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, and also when you look at the fact that this is not going to be cheap. That's very expensive to pay these types of guys. He's going to expect Brett Brown to perform. You know, he said that a first round exit or any type of early exit from the playoffs will be problematic.
Oh, you went against Brad Stevens last year. If the players were to begin today, you'd be going against Brad Stevens again. Hasn't been the greatest year for Brad Stevens, but it ain't the playoffs. And if you get past him, Mike Budenholzer has proven that he's an elite coach in the game of basketball. He's up there waiting for you in Milwaukee. And Nick Nurse has shown that he knows a thing or two about what the hell he's doing with the way that he has had the Raptors playing. And last but not least, Nate McMillan is a candidate for Coach of the Year because we know that brother can coach too. These are the people that Brett Brown would inevitably have to go up against come postseason time. And I would strongly advise that he be ready.
I agree with pretty much maybe 90% of what Stephen A. Smith had to say there. I believe he was on the money there. He probably has been talking to someone in Philadelphia, as he was a beat writer there for the Sixers during the Allen Iverson years. He has a lot of connections there. He's probably been talking at his ear to what's going on in the office. And the Sixers seem to have one of the most leaky offices there is. I mean, it's ridiculous the amount of information that seems to come out of there, with the exception of, what was going on with Markelle Fultz.
It's really a roster issue. I understand what you mean about Coach Brown. I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the game, but I think he's a good coach. I can think of some other coaches who I felt lost multiple games.
And I'd like to say before Max even continues, I do not agree with this idea that it is a roster issue.
Maybe even 3 in a playoff series. But,
I can't.
Well, the Thunder coach, I'm sorry.
Scott Brooks?
Scott Brooks.
No, he didn't lose 3 games.
Yeah, Scott. I'd have to go back and look, but Scott Brooks had some pretty bad playoff series after coaching very well in the regular season. But anyway, this is a roster issue. Whether you consider Jimmy Butler a 2 or a 3, then the open position, whether you consider that a 2 or a 3, with Redick and then T.J. McConnell really is a problem. When Redick's not hitting shots, Stephen A., they have an issue with transition defense because of him and McConnell. I love T.J. McConnell. I think he's a really good player. But he's like an energy off-the-bench player to give you some life when you need it. He doesn't shoot from the outside, and he's small. So it presents certain defensive liabilities, right?
Gives you quality minutes, though.
He hustles. Yeah, I like him. But there is a hole in your starting 5, especially when Redick's not hitting shots.
All right, now I'm going to explain why Max Kellerman is wrong here. Max Kellerman, his argument is that the Sixers issue or the Achilles heel is not Brett Brown and his decision-making, but it's the roster itself, which I disagree. I disagree with that completely. And I say that because he just said that Jimmy Butler could play a 2 or a 3. Okay, that means he could do both. Now, why is he playing 3 and why is Redick playing 2? Well, if Jimmy Butler could play 2, wouldn't it be on the coach to put him there, to remove that particular hole on the defensive side, if what we're going to say is that Redick is just this big defensive liability? That's number one. It's because Brett Brown wants to have the 3-point shooter of Redick in the lineup. Brett Brown's vision is that Redick and Tobias serve as floor spacers so that Ben Simmons can get to the lane, so that Joel Embiid have room to work, and so that Jimmy Butler can either shoot or create or get to the rim and work himself. This is the thinking behind that. Now, there is some truth to the idea that Redick is a defensive liability along with T.J. McConnell. But that is only the case when Brett Brown runs a particular lineup where he has both of them in there versus teams like the Boston Celtics, when the Boston Celtics may go with a Marcus Smart and a Jaylen Brown, or Marcus Smart and, say, Gordon Hayward. And then Brett Brown runs in there, T.J. McConnell and J.J. Redick. And what happens is, whenever they need an easy bucket, what they'll do is they'll post up either T.J. McConnell, but really J.J. Redick with Marcus Smart if they can get that matchup. And the problem And where Max is wrong is he says that this is a roster issue, when in fact, no, this is a Brett Brown issue. Brett Brown, he is the one that's deciding to run that lineup out there. And I would not say that it's because we don't have other players, because of the fact that in the past we've had Markelle Fultz on the team, who is taller and who has had an incredible wingspan to help against being, back down. We've had Justin Anderson, who did a great job on Dwayne Wade in last year's series, and there's no reason to believe that he couldn't stick a Marcus Smart or a Terry Rozier, who are inferior players to Dwayne Wade, even at this age. But Brett Brown won't put such players in the game. He refused to put Rashawn Holmes in the game, a guy who could come in and give you energy, and he went with a slower, more cloggier Amir Johnson for whatever reason. And these are things that people like myself who follow the 76ers, who watch every single game, who pay attention to every rotation, is able to recognize. So I don't really fault Max here for this, but I would disagree with him that no, ultimately the roster issue is Brett Brown, because even now the Sixers, for defensive purposes, can put Jonathan Simmons in there along with T.J. McConnell, as opposed to Redick and McConnell, to at least alleviate the defensive liability there.
And so there is that, and I know it's like, well, wait a minute, every team has a weakness, but you're talking about an Eastern Conference. We're putting aside Indiana, because you and I both believe that as amazing a job as McMillan is doing up there, without Oladipo, they're not really going to be a playoff threat. So it's really down to the other top four teams, right? And all those other teams added pieces at the trade deadline and have fewer weaknesses on paper, I think, than the Philadelphia 76ers. So there's that one roster.
Yeah, I would disagree with that as well. It still goes back to the coaching and the play calling. I don't care what team in the Eastern Conference you face. The Philadelphia 76ers can always provide matchup problems for whatever team. For example, if the Sixers are playing against the Milwaukee Bucks are running Bledsoe and Brogdon out there in the backcourt, excuse me. Either one of those guys are players that Ben Simmons can post up in the post and pretty much have a field day on either one of those guys, because he's playing the point guard. And the reason why they won't put Giannis on him is because Giannis will have to pay attention to either Jimmy Butler or Tobias Harris or even Joel Embiid, depending on the lineup that you have out there. So there's no excuse for that. That would still be a Brett Brown fault for not putting in the lineup or not making sure that the team is exploiting the matchup problems. If the Sixers are playing the Toronto Raptors are running Kyle Lowry out there at the point guard. This is another guy that if they put him on Ben Simmons can post him up. And this is the same with the Boston Celtics. They don't go to it enough when they have Kyrie out there, when they have Marcus Smart out there. Neither one of these guys, when they're running the point, can stick Ben Simmons, not to mention same thing with Terry Rozier. What happens is when we're in these games with the Boston Celtics, what you find the Sixers doing is they get into this style of offense where they're forcing the three-point shot as opposed to taking many of the two-point shots that are there and allowing the threes to just come within the natural flow of the offense. Let them come as a result of, okay, the Celtics decide they need to double-team Ben Simmons because he's unstoppable down there with Marcus Smart or Rozier on him, and then he will kick it out to the three-point shooters. This is the way Boston beats us. They go to their bread and butter. We double up. We double or we switch off, and then they find the open three-point shooters. So ultimately, it still will go back down to coaching and not so much this roster issue as Max is trying to assert.
That one slot in the starting five that I just mentioned. And here's the other thing. And I brought it up a couple of weeks ago. And in this business, Stephen A., you hear things sometimes, and you don't want to report it. So sometimes people have to read between the lines. And what did I say a couple weeks ago when it was Joel Embiid's knee, right? I said the knee bone's connected to the, anyone remember what I said?
Backbone?
The thigh bone?
Backbone.
Oh.
The knee bone's connected to the
My neck.
backbone.
My
That's
back.
what I was
That's the
hearing.
one I know.
That the knee bone is connected to the backbone, everybody.
Got it.
And Joel Embiid, you brought it up, Stephen A. He isn't able to practice always to the extent that he can be in the kind of shape for the game, that he can be the same incredible second half of the game force as he is in the first half of the game.
All right, I want to say a few things about this. First of all, Max Kellerman is not a doctor, okay? He doesn't know anything about knee bones, back bones, or anything. But he is one of those guys who believes he's so uber intelligent that he can speak on any topic, which oftentimes makes him sound ridiculous. He has no idea what's going on with that. Joel Embiid has played way more games than many people have thought. I mean, I understand his first 2 seasons, he had the foot injury that he's really recovered from. We don't hear any signs of his foot being a problem. He has had like a lingering little issue with the lower back and the knee thing, but nothing serious that really caused him to miss any significant amount of time. The only other significant amount of time he missed was the orbital bone in the eye that he missed after colliding with Markelle Fultz. Right now, he's sitting out for precautionary reasons for the most part. When they've checked his knee, there is no structural damage present. So I'm not quite sure what Max Kellerman is talking about. Everyone knows there's a difference between being hurt and being injured. And right now, Joel Embiid is just dealing with like some discomfort and hurt that rest would help. But to come to this conclusion that this is the thing that will be the Achilles heel of the Sixers is something I'm really growing weary of, really tired of it. Until like you have some real evidence of this being the case, it's like I really wish these guys would just leave it alone.
And that makes a lot of sense if the knee bone is connected to the backbone, everybody.
We read between the lines. We're picking up what you're putting down.
That, when you really want to talk about the Sixers and the issues they could have, remember what Horford did in the second half of games to Embiid in the playoffs last year? Yeah. And now Embiid is out with a...
This is the thing that gets me with that, too, and I'm going to do a whole separate video on this Al Horford thing. All right, now, I'm going to give Al Horford some credit. It's obvious that Al Horford is a great defensive center who studies Joel Embiid. He studies, all of his moves. He sees where he likes to put the ball. He knows where to swipe. He knows where to swat and different things like that. He's good at balancing himself, his legs, so that he holds his ground well. And he's very difficult to move off his spot. So I give Al Horford credit for all of those little tricks and trade that, an old head player has. But this idea that he just owns Joel Embiid, to me, is just absolutely ridiculous because people don't mention the fact that, there are games where Embiid has scored 30s and 40s on Al Horford, right? No one talks about that. But, we want to talk about because, and it wasn't even just Al Horford. It was actually Baines. Because in last season's playoffs, at the end of the game, when the Sixers were trying to go inside to him to finish, which is, a situation you don't want anyway. You don't really want to go inside in those situations. But there are times when Joel Embiid was just flat out hacked by Baines or by Horford. And, people just overlooked that, even though the NBA came back and said, that there was a foul that was miscalled and the officials got it wrong. Despite all of that, they want to come with that. And, Max is trying to say that Embiid isn't as energetic or he's tired, fatigued. Well, last year, Max, a lot of the fatigue came as a result of Joel Embiid being out and then having to come back and play after being out for those weeks because of the orbital bone fracture. Had nothing to do with anything he's talking about. He's talking about Max is trying to say that he has knee problems, so he doesn't practice, and because he doesn't practice, he doesn't have the energy or that he doesn't have the fitness that he needs. I completely disagree with that. There are a number of players that don't practice, among them LeBron James, and no one talks about that as being an issue.
What kind of issue right now? Back?
No.
That is a big issue.
No, the injury, Stephen.
That's not true. It's a need, Max. He doesn't even know what the hell he's talking about.
Hey, I want to throw one thing else out and see if you're concerned about it too. What about the fact that they wouldn't have home court against the Bucks or Raptors?
Well, I'm not worried about that. They need to worry about getting out of the first round against Boston, Molly, because Boston has had their number. I mean, you got to crawl before you walk. The hell with Toronto or Milwaukee. That's semifinal. That's a semifinals matchup. What they got to worry about is getting out of the first round, because if the players were to begin the day, they go against the Boston Celtics, who, by the way, recently came into Philadelphia without Kyrie Irving and beat the Philadelphia 76ers. Let's point that out.
All right, well, there you have it, my people. So slap a like on this here if you like this conversation that we had. And remember, slap a like, subscribe. We're trying to build this channel up, give you some more Greek content dealing with sports and other things like that. So with that,